So for the lyrical etude for clarinet at the high school level, there are several things to unpack with this. The first thing that I would ask you to note is the key of E flat major. And within this etude, we also visit the keys of B flat major and C minor. So if you're fluent in all of those scales, that'll help set you up for success even before you start looking at this etude. I would recommend you making sure that those scales, E flat major, B flat major, C minor, are well in your fingers, because you're going to need to call on them to play this correctly. The tempo says andante con moto, so that's sort of a walking pace with motion. What I think that really means is it gives you some artistic license for some rubato, some shaping of the tempo, some molding of the pulse, a little bit of push and pull in order to achieve good phrasing as you go through here. And we'll look at some spots where we can do that. I think that the etude really starts in measure 9. These first 8 bars that you have are sort of like an introduction or an invitation for your listener to hear the rest of the etude. There's nothing super melodic about them. They help establish the center, the key center of E flat major. So I would use those as real opportunities to demonstrate your sound, your control of dynamic, and also your use of rubato. I think that probably the first 8 bars are excellent spots to employ the con moto part of the tempo marking. So again, thinking of measures 1 through 8 as sort of like a setup for the rest of the piece, I would make sure that I took my time inside of the fermatas in bar 4 and bar 8. Particularly the second fermata, the one that's directly before the rest, because that's where you can show people how much you can control your sound as you taper it to a soft dynamic. So once you reach measure 9, that's really where the true etude starts. The rest was just sort of nice introduction, and this is the key of E flat major, and now we really get rolling with melody and development. I would suggest playing it on the slower side of the indicated tempo. 72, maybe 69, keeping in mind that within whatever tempo you select, there's room to go a bit faster and a bit slower as you're playing, because you can use that artistic license that was given to you in the tempo marking. A little bit of musical grammar stuff. So most often when we have key signatures of multiple accidentals, so in this case 3 flats, it's often the last accidental that gets forgotten. So the A flat in this case. What I would recommend is look at measure 13. It's got those grace notes in it. That second grace note is an A flat. Even though it's small, the key signature still applies. So if it's not marked already in your music, I would mark that A flat on that little tiny grace note headed into beat 2 of that measure as an A flat. If you look in measure 17, same thing. The first note there is an A flat, and that one's maybe obvious, but perhaps not, because directly before that you've had a bunch of A natural accidentals. So A natural is kind of the last type of A that's been left in your mind. I would remind myself of the key signature by writing the A flat right there in measure 17. So everybody's going to look at measures 11 and measure 15, and the eyes are going to get really wide because we see lots and lots of fast notes in those bars. But I have good news for you. Even though we see 3 beams through there, the notes are not that fast, because keep in mind your bass tempo is fairly slow to the quarter note. Again, in the range of 69, 72 with room on either side. So what I would suggest is that we first make sure that we understand how these notes sound and how they flow over time. Please do not get to the end of measure 11 and bar 15 and just flail your fingers and hope for the best. Let's break it down into smaller groups so that we can really hear the notes, and also so that our fingers get a sense of the technical pathway that they need to follow as you go through the clarinet range. So what I would recommend is take your metronome, and I would set it on an eighth note pulse. So this is eighth note equals 126, which is just a bit under tempo from maybe what the goal is. And I would practice this in groups of 5 notes. So let's look at the end of bar 11. Here's how I would practice this. And I would work in those little 5-note groups to make sure that I was hearing all the notes, making sure that my fingers were connecting with all the notes, that I wasn't missing a key or so forth, and that they all spoke. And then I would link them into the larger groups that are written, the groups of 8 notes plus 1 downbeat, so 9 total. You can do the same thing in bar 15. So on. Please do not just get there and try to go for it and play as fast as you can, because keep in mind that those fast notes still have a right to be heard, and they still exist in the context of the etude, meaning you can't just gloss through them and hope for the best. They must be heard, and you must connect with them in your technique as you're going through those big technical runs. So some things to be aware of as we talk about phrasing, which for wind players, we have to consider where we breathe and when we don't breathe and so forth. So in addition to all of the written rests that are there, I would suggest breathing at the following spots. In measure 13, after the quarter note, after the G, is a good time to fill up with some air. And also at the end of measure 21. Again, this is sort of, I talked about this in the middle school study a little bit, but we have a big skip in the register between the E flat and the B flat down there. So sneaking a breath in there will also not only help us fill up with air to make sure that we have enough to sustain the phrase, it'll also help us achieve that big register leap that we have. So in addition to the written rests, after the first beat of measure 13, and at the end of bar 21 for breathing. And then finally, the last thing as it relates to phrasing is we have these notions in music of consonance and dissonance. In other words, things that sound pleasing and things that maybe are less pleasing to the ear. And it's practice that we always emphasize dissonance and de-emphasize consonance. So what I mean by that is you have several instances in here where you have an opportunity to exaggerate dissonance. If you're familiar with this, we have several appoggiaturas in here, or suspensions in some cases, that we're going to want to play out. So the best case of this that I will point out to you is at the very end. If we look at perhaps the last 2 bars, as I said at the beginning, we're in the key of E flat major, so obviously E flat is our main note. We want to end on it, and we do, but it's delayed a little bit by that F. That F sort of displaces the consonants that we're looking for. Great, what does that mean? That means you should play the F louder than the E flat, decrescendo as you go through there. So if you put those last 2 bars together, again, look for opportunities to play up the dissonance and the resolution to the consonants. Okay. Other spots where you could look at that, measure 12 has one, measure 16 has one. Right? So you can hear those on the recording. Good luck as you prepare. Please let me know if you have questions about this. I think that this is a very lovely etude to prepare. Just make sure that you don't let the technical elements of rhythm distract you from making beautiful music. Good luck.